Well, hey everyone, thanks for joining us to this live stream for an update on the ever-evolving situation with the Log4j, or as it's now known, Log4 shell vulnerability event that's been going around the internet over the past 4 days. I'm Ilkka Turunen, the field CTO here at Sonatype, and joining me today to have a quick chat about this is Brian Fox, our co-founder and CTO. Hey, Brian, how you doing?
Hi, everyone.
And Steve Poole, developer advocate. Hey, Steve.
Hi there.
So let's get right into it. Essentially, last 4 days have been quite a whirlwind for many organizations, not just updating Java, or maintaining Java software themselves, but also with all the security updates coming from various different vendors. So why don't we start off by just level setting everybody in a minute or two, Brian and Steve, where this all began and where we're kind of at right now.
Okay, so when did it begin? Friday? Bit before Friday?
Yeah.
So the technical challenge is that people have discovered very quickly that there's this, I would say, really simple vulnerability within Log4j, and from like 2.0 on to about 2.15, I think was the top one so far. And it's really simple. So as a Java developer, you'll be using Log4j, and that's the right thing to do. And your Log4j is going to record information, a log, debug information, status information, whatever you want. And the chances are that you're recording data that's coming in from the web, headers and things like that. And what's been discovered is that if the bad actors can insert a specifically formatted string into that data, the Log4j will then parse that data and go off to a bad server and pull down actual code to execute. So in the usual sort of security parlance, this is a remote code execution vulnerability, and it's trivial to execute because you've just basically got to figure out how to get data into the server in the right format.
Yeah, that is pretty chilling when you think about how easy it is to do. You know, over the weekend, I was explaining this to people, and the reality of it is any field in a form is now kind of liable to this attack. It's just a special sentence that you put in there. So let's talk about what the original remediation advice was and what the kind of up-to-date remediation advice is. Brian, can you kind of bring us up to speed?
Yeah, so the advice obviously is to upgrade to the latest version. In some cases, I believe you can also change the Log4j config. The original advice talked about the fact that certain JREs versions were not susceptible to the attack, but that's now shown to not be the whole story. I think to understand all of these things, I think you need to understand a little bit more about what actually is causing this vulnerability. I'm not sure that I would classify it necessarily as a bug in Log4j. It reminds me, it's very similar in concept to some of the earlier struts vulnerabilities, and also the commons collections one, where you have code that is intended to do a thing, and bad actors have figured out how to chain a series of events together to create an outcome. And what was happening in this case is Log4j message formatting provides developers the ability to sort of provide formatting around the log messages. What's happened in this case is when that is turned on, and part of the problem is that is the default. Most people use it that way. That means that any of the log string that gets passed to it gets interpreted. It's not unlike a SQL injection attack, that the developer meant only special commands were coming from them, but that the data was going through from the end user. And so the problem is, when you're talking about a log framework, think about all the things in application logs. And it's a user agents, headers, file requests, messages, you name it. And that gets executed. And so what the attack has been pulled together to do is put in a message that uses a combination of JNDI, the native integration, and LDAP to cause it to cause the Log4j code or the application running Log4j code to reach out and fetch something and then execute it. What we saw this morning is that somebody figured out another way to use the fact that message expansion can execute code to leverage a different class to do something that's not JNDI. That's why now all of a sudden it doesn't matter what JRE you're using. And so the only way to prevent this behavior is to either upgrade, because that's going to disable the expansion by default, or change your config, which I believe is possible in all of these, to disable the message expansion. This is not unlike saying, you know what, unsafe deserialization is a problem no matter what you have in place. You need to figure that out. It's kind of the same thing, right? So you need to stop that expansion because it's going to lead to a never-ending chain of further exploits around this.
Yeah, I think the last time this occurred, we called it gadget chaining, I think was the InfoSec term for it, and it's absolutely true. I mean, it's within their interest to just find another class and another class. You know, you got anything poorly encapsulated, you're gonna be in the impact radius. So I think we're going to see kind of an evolution of this, and that's why one of the things we initially heard quite a lot is, well, can I just WAF all of my software and run a web application firewall on top of it? And because of this evolution of the chain that you can put into that JDNI string, it's very, very hard to say that the WAF that you put in yesterday is still secure for the methods, because there are eyeballs around there looking at it all the time.
Yeah, that's a great point. That a lot of the vendors that have the ability to see network traffic have put in places specific signatures looking for these what are effectively LDAP hits and then the payload downloads. But as this evolves, like, hate to use the analogy, but like COVID, the JNDI attack was the alpha variant, and we're already seeing new variants of this attack. They're going to have different network signatures. In fact, some of them might not have a network signature, because there may be a chain of gadgets that can be linked together that don't require you to fetch external stuff to execute.
Or chain of software. One of the most inventive ones I saw over the weekend was sending the bad string to a software where it then logs it down, and there's another piece of software that aggregates the logs into kind of a searchable thing, and that was written in Java, and it logged the thing that it logged. So that then caused.
I don't think I'm telling the world anything that somebody hasn't thought of already. We were talking about that this weekend. Well, does blockchain software, is it vulnerable to this? As far as we can tell, most blockchain software is not written in Java. However, I bet a whole bunch of blockchain monitoring stacks are. And so somebody exchanges, exactly. Somebody sticks the target string into one of the payloads. If it gets logged somewhere, that's the attack, right?
Yeah. So I think there's two things to call out here. There's about the substitution. There's the original thing where we saw the idea with people literally figuring out how to pull bad code in to do the RCE. But the other thing is, because this JNDI string has substitution replacement, people are using it to find information about the system. It's very easy because JNDI has got things, Log4j, it's only JNDI substitution, it's things like JVM configuration substitution. So if you want to find the class path of a target server, which is always useful information for the bad guys, that's turning out to be really easy now. And coming back to the one of the reasons that this is so impactful is because we all, as developers, we use Log4j to record information to diagnose problems later on. And one of the things you do then is you try really hard to capture the data that comes in as is. You don't want to do any more than that. You want to just catch what is. And so we have that situation where any thought of data sanitization for debug, was never going to happen. So it's all pretty bad. And in talking about other variations, we're seeing examples where because all sorts of data gets logged, it's as simple as changing your Twitter handle or going to your maybe you've got an address and putting JNDI escape the escape stuff into your home address, and that gets logged. Yeah.
That's where I think it's a lot. People need to think of it a bit like the SQL injection attacks, right? We learned that decades ago that just merely sticking that stuff through unfiltered is a problem. It's the same thing in this regard. If it's logged, it's a potential problem. And by the way, it doesn't matter if it didn't get written to the log file itself. If the log4j call is happening, even if the logs are disabled, there's still that potential, right? Because the expansion is going to happen, and then somewhere later in the code, it decides this message is not going to get written. And so that means people looking at their log files to see what types of things might be exploitable they're not going to get the whole picture. They're only going to see what they're actually committing to the file at the very end.
Yeah, and that's a danger, when you then start thinking about stuff like the Unicode Trojan attack vector that was discovered earlier on. There's, all of it just gives us the chills. I think this is a safe way to say, and I think there's going to be a lot of maintenance to come. So, kind of one other question that I got over the weekend, and I think this is something that's on top of people's minds as they kind of emerge from that first wave of patching, is how did it get so bad? Why is this worse than others, and why are we all running a fire drill? And I think, kind of as I was explaining it to people, part of the reason here is because it's a low skilled attack. It's really, really widespread, this component. It's like practically, it's even on the Mars rover, on the helicopter. Apparently they've added Log4j logging. So I definitely don't want to be doing that OTA. I mean, that's quite the lot of work, but it's really, really impactful. And kind of the best analogy I could come up with is it's like someone figured out that if you send someone a postcard, but you kind of write a special address on the postcard or a special note, that opens up the recipient house's doors. It's like so fundamental and kind of counterintuitive in some ways. It kind of it does that. But let's talk really, really quickly about what's the timeline here. So, and what's kind of happened on the attacker side, because I think that's pretty interesting. So we have kind of heard of vulnerable traffic already. I think the first evidence of that started at 9 a.m. UK time on Friday, when the vulnerability came out, midnight?
I don't.
Late on Thursday. It started in China. There were some conversations earlier, and it started to propagate from there. It got to us late Thursday, and then really kind of hit everybody else Friday morning Eastern time.
Yeah. I think here in the UK we kind of saw it land pretty much dead on midnight. And there's pretty much evidence already. I mean, within hours, we saw reports of traffic on the internet just literally running this kind of the variant alpha, if we continue down this analogy path. And today, I've just literally seen a couple of news articles that kind of start saying there's been a massive ransomware attack here and there. It's kind of the question is on everyone's mind right now: is it Log4Shell or is it not? Right? We'll see how that evolves. But kind of based on historical evidence, like you mentioned, Brian and Steve, Commons collections and the Struts2 vulnerability, and the Spring Core vulnerability of kind of similar irk comes to mind. So what were the kind of lessons that we learned from those last few times that we did this sort of fire drill? Anything come to mind?
Other than fixing your removing the vulnerable piece of code as soon as possible. I mean, that's the primary thing here. This is so bad. You just can't take the risk. You have got to find them and remove them. And as we're hearing, it's not about what version of Java you're running. It's if you're using Log4j, 2.0 onwards up to whatever, what do we say, 2.15, 2.16, you've got to upgrade now. I'm not sure what other advice you can have other than do that now.
Sorry, Brian, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, just wanted to lean a little bit harder on that, because you may ask your teams, are you using Log4j? They may say, no, we're using SLF4j or Logback or something like that. I don't feel confident enough to say that that's a perfect answer to say you're not affected, because dependencies underneath the hood may in fact still be using Log4j, and those other logging frameworks, while you're directly using them, they're also capturing the output from, the logging tools that your dependencies are using underneath and writing them out to your log files. As far as I understand, if that's in your class path anywhere, and they're able to cause that particular module to issue this command, you could still be vulnerable. So you need to really assess all your dependencies all the way down, understand what those things are potentially logging. Like I said before, even if they're not writing it to the file, if input is getting to those submodules it is attempting to log in a debug fashion, you might be exploitable. So just saying we don't use logback, we use or we don't use Log4j, we use logback as an example, is not a safe answer all by itself, right?
Yeah, because
No,
you've got to remember that your dependencies have probably made their own logging choices too, and if they've made a different one, then you could be vulnerable.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to look and see if it's in your stack, right? So it's the same questions I always tell people when I'm out speaking at conferences. Today is the day. If you can't answer where a particular dependency is used in which applications, you need to know exactly which version. You may have Log4j version 1 in your applications. As far as we know right now, it is not susceptible to this type of attack. It's certainly not as susceptible to this exact attack. I think time will tell if people find related things in older versions or not. But you need to understand which ones exactly are vulnerable, which applications am I using it in, and then you need that ability to track it across your portfolio. So if you don't have tooling to help you understand your dependencies all the way down, not just your direct dependencies, but your transitive dependencies, if you don't already have that in place, this is going to be a very, very hard task to undertake because you don't even know where to start looking.
Yeah, I think that's the long tail of this, because I think pretty soon we're going to start also seeing other projects that have borrowed the JDNI implementation from this particular component. Those vulnerable classes do exist in other projects as well. We were kind of looking at those numbers earlier, and hopefully we'll have some kind of blog to follow up on that. I guess just kind of at a high level, if you're our customer, then by this stage you should have received a continuous monitoring alert if you're using Lifecycle or Firewall. We're recommending that you turn on firewalling against any of these vulnerable versions, of course. But the standard security policy violations should prevent you from kind of making this mistake if you haven't already made it. So kind of textbook case example for software bill of materials, and having that at hand. And I think this kind of will teach us as an industry quite a lot of lessons on those kind of going forward. So we're kind of coming out on time here, pretty much moving ahead on the top of the hour. So I think for me, the kind of number one lesson right now is we're definitely seeing the attack. We're seeing traffic happening. We're seeing a lot of activity mitigating this issue. But it's not just a fix your own software. It's also fix all the software that you know or don't know uses Log4j as well. Any other parting thoughts from the two of you?
Well, so I'd say, obviously, don't dismiss this. You have to take this seriously. It's not only, and it's looking at your application, your dependencies, and think about where your Java code is running and where other people's Java code is running. So not just if you've got a traditional server, but also containers. If you've got if you're running an application in a container, is that safe? So you've got to think hard about where all your Java code is, and you've got to remediate it as soon as possible. It's a big task, but the SBOM type approach will give you a leg up on trying to understand your exposure.
Yeah, and I was going to say basically the same thing, but to emphasize that it's not just the code you're producing and shipping to your customers; it's the tools you're running yourself. I saw a report this morning that Kronos was ransomwared, and they're offline for a couple of weeks, is what I saw. That's a payroll company, so your company may be using that to track time, and suddenly can't do it. There may be other things running on your infrastructure. It could be part of your continuous delivery platforms. It could be part of your financial platforms. It could be your embedded devices. I saw a disclosure on Friday night from a security vendor that had a shockingly long list of security devices that were susceptible to this. So if they're sitting on your network and inspecting packets, any packet that goes through with this payload in it could potentially be exploited. And so the scope is very, very large. You need to be thinking about your legacy applications as well. Log4j 2.0 was released back in July of 2014. So anything older than that is probably safe, but anything in the last 6 to 7 years could possibly be using Log4j version 2 and be vulnerable. So you need to look at all the things. And Java's in a lot of places that you may not realize. So, you know, we saw this with struts where it was embedded in tools and things like that for a very long time. Same thing with Commons collections that got hospitals ransomware because they had old versions of devices that hadn't been updated. I think we're going to be seeing this Log4j popping up in places that people would never think to see it for a very long time.
Yeah, I don't think that it's beyond the realm of speculation to say that probably the first wave of breaches have already happened, you know, just because of the volume of traffic that's been observed. I think we'll be learning from this for weeks and months to come. So yeah, I guess that's as much of a message that we can leave you all with. Stay safe, continue patching, and we'll continue to monitor the situation, send updates as and when we find them. So we'll be hoping to share some of these insights on blogs and things like that as well. So keep an eye out. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks.